scripture this morning comes from James chapter 3, verses 3 through 6, and James chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Whoever speaks evil against one another or judges another speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. So who then are you to judge your neighbor? The word of God for the people of God.
Well, I know you join with me in thanking our music ministry, thanking Kim and all of her team for just a wonderful music ministry. We are a choir church. I joke a lot, especially during baptisms, about the 447,512 choirs that are here, but I promise you, as somebody who cannot play one instrument or sing one bit, I am eternally and deeply grateful for Kim and all of the music ministry. I also would be remiss if I did not point something out this morning. Next weekend, Jono and Sarah will be graduating from Candler, and this summer will be preaching their commissioning sermons here. So I hope that you'll join with me in congratulating them on graduating as well. Preaching sometimes is scary. So this series, about 10, 11 months ago, when I started kind of developing and walking into it, here was the thinking on it. We kind of live in a meaner world right now than we have been for a while. And so this series was geared towards that, helping us walk through it. It was about 3.5 weeks ago that I was really starting to lay it out and walk through it. I went, ooh, this is hard. And I wasn't talking about you, I was talking about me. This is hard. Last week we talked about cornering criticism. Sometimes you preach a sermon and you go, ooh, I hope I still have a job next week. It has been incredible, the feedback that you have given me. The folks that have said to me, you know, I didn't realize just how much. I didn't realize just how, you know, it never hit me just how much I've been thinking about it. I'm not necessarily doing any better, but at least I'm thinking about it. And I'm judging and I'm guiding my heart and I'm looking, and thank you for that. My favorite was a phone call on Tuesday. A church member called me, and he was telling me that he was out at Dick's Sporting Goods out by the mall and saying that he was buying a driver. He was buying a driver. It was time for a driver, and he was there. And while he was there was this person that was shopping for golf clubs that was just as nasty as you can be. They were just being horrible and nasty and mean to the salesperson, and it was just so uncomfortable how nasty they were being. And the more he said, I just stood there and but I just kind of stood there, and then as soon as the guy left, I ran up to the salesperson, and he said, Derek, what I would have done in the past is said, whoo, that was some of the meanest, nastiest people. Whoo, that person was horrible. Maybe you've been there. He said, but I didn't do that this time. I was thinking about the message, and I was thinking about my tongue, and instead of doing that, I walked up to the salesperson and said, thank you for how gracious and how professional you handled that situation. I want you to know you did a wonderful job. I want you to know that I was so impressed and that was so incredible. And I never went negative. And he said, it made my day better. just staying in that positive place and staying in that positive moment and communicating in that way helped me traditionally, helped me immensely. Brothers and sisters, this is a discipleship issue. What comes from our tongue originates from our hearts. When we tame our tongues, we heal our hearts. When we control what comes out of our mouths, we will eventually change the state of our hearts. But gossip is a function of a dysfunctional heart. It's hard. There's no one in this room that hasn't gossiped this week, me included. It's part of what we do. There's no one here who hasn't heard gossip. It's just become a part of our world. Can I talk to you about a community very different from this one? Very, very different from this one. I served there about 20 years ago. The community is just different. There was actually somebody from 845 that I knew from when I served there that was here, that was shaking her head the whole time, agreeing with me. This community, they filmed in the heat of the night, and they do the vampire stuff there now. It's different. It's full of characters, and I mean characters. There's people there by the name of Fleta and Gidget and Loy. There's like 20 buddies just right there in that little small group of the church. It's just a different place. And there was a woman there when I was serving there whose name was Miss Sarah. You don't know Miss Sarah, so we can talk about her here in the room. You with me? Miss Sarah was good at this. She was good at it. This is how good she was. In a room, a sanctuary much like this one, in a narthex much like that one, after church one morning, she started talking to people that were in worship, and this is what she said. Ooh, I'm so worried. Ooh, I'm so worried. I am so, so worried. And you know what you have to say when somebody says to you, I'm so, so worried? What'd she say? About what? You see, you've been in this conversation. I can tell. You're good at this. About what? She's got you. She's got you. And then she'd say, I'm just so worried about Mr. Frank. And this is a true story. I'm so worried about Mr. Frank. I'm so worried about Mr. Frank. Well, what have you got to say now? Why? She's got you. She's got you. Well, now that you ask. When I was leaving the church, I was up at the church, I was working in the food pantry. Can you hear? I was working the food pantry, and when I was heading home, I drove past Hester's. Now, you don't know about Hester's. Hester's was a pool hall in Covington on Conyers Street. Oh, I said the name of the community. Look at me. You already knew. You already knew. It's on Conyers Street, this pool hall. They had the best bacon cheeseburger you have ever had in your life at this pool hall. And on days like this morning when it was raining, the folks who worked outside, they would fill Hester's parking lot up because, shoot some pool, you can't work, the cheeseburger. Oh, yeah, and they had the coldest draft beer in town. You with me? This pool hall. She said about Mr. Frank, when I was driving home from the food pantry, I saw Mr. Frank's truck in the Hester's parking lot. She said, not only that, when I was heading back up to the church for prayer meeting, she said, his truck was still there. When I was driving home from prayer meeting, his truck was still there. And she walked around the room and this narthex and said, I'm so worried about Mr. Frank. And then I saw one of the most amazing won't God do it, won't he do it moments I have ever seen in ministry. About the 12th or 13th person she had expressed her worry about, Mr. Frank walked up and said, Sarah, what are you talking about? Sarah had no shame. She looked at Mr. Frank and said, well, you've been down at that pool hall. I saw your truck there all day long. All day long, your truck sat in front of that pool hall. And you know what Mr. Frank did? He didn't say a word. He looked at her, walked out the front doors of the sanctuary, of the church, got in his truck, and went home. This is a true story. About 5 o'clock, he got back in his truck and drove over to Miss Sarah's and parked it in front of her house. And walked home. He parked it almost in the middle of the street so that you couldn't help but miss it, and you had to drive around it. He picked up that truck about 10:30, 11 o'clock the next morning. A gossip is hard to control. Gossip is impossible to control. Do you know the Bible speaks constantly about hearsay and gossip? Proverbs 13:3, 3,000 years ago said this. If anybody ever asks you, is the Bible still relevant? You quote some Proverbs to them and see how it goes. Those who guard their mouths preserve their lives. Those who open wide their lips come to ruin and get trucks parked in front of their house. This is the one right here. The words of a whisperer, I love that description. A whisperer are like delicious morsels. All right, you're in church. We're in church. I know you got people around you, and you don't want to do this in front of them, and you're in front of me, and you don't want to do it. But man, doesn't gossip taste good? I mean, come on. Come on, be with me for a minute now. Doesn't it taste good? And when it's a good one, and when it's a good one, woo, that's good stuff. It's like a delicious morsel, the writer says. Oh, it tastes good. But you know, it doesn't stop at your mouth, and it doesn't stop at your throat. It goes all the way down into your inner parts of the body. It stays with you. Proverbs 11:13, a gossip goes about telling secrets, but one who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a confidence. You know what it's like to have told someone, and it came back. Proverbs 26:20, for lack of wood the fire goes out. Where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. The fire goes out. James says it like this, so also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of life, and is itself set on fire by hell. Have you ever watched those videos of forest fires out west in California and Arizona? Do you know how every one of those fires got started? A spark. A spark. And that spark becomes this consuming, destructive fire that burns down homes and houses and neighborhoods and communities and destroys everything in its path. And destroys it in such a way that it's never the same again. Even if you rebuild, it is never the same again. Relationships are the same way in this fire. Families, homes, churches. This fire of the tongue consumes. Another part of that text is once it's out there, you can't get it back. I lost about 2 hours this week and down the YouTube rabbit hole of forest fires as I was working through the sermon. Have you ever seen those forest fire helicopters that have the 300-gallon buckets that come down, and they take those buckets and they don't take them to a fire hose. They don't go to the fire station. They find the biggest lake they can, and they dump that big old bucket, 300 gallons, in the middle of the lake, and they scoop up the water and they drop it on the fire, and they know what's going to happen the first time they do it. You know what's going to happen? Nothing. And the tongue is the same way. It creates a fire and destruction that takes bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket of grace and water to put it out. Gossip is exponentially more difficult today than it was 2,000 years ago. And I'm talking mostly to you parents right now. Your kids are going to hate this. I looked at the God's Light at 8:45 and spoke directly to them. Social media has given us a tremendous instrument to spread hurt and to hurt one another. And the crazy part is we take this tool, this instrument, and we hand it to our children. When kids get to a certain age, we are trained. It is ingrained in us that we go teach them how to drive a vehicle. We strap them into a 1,000-ton vehicle or a 2-ton vehicle, and we teach them how to drive so that what? So that they don't kill themselves or someone else. This instrument, this tool, this phone, this smartphone, I can't tell you how many funerals of middle schoolers and high schools that I've sat out because they were bullied through this instrument. And so kids, if you're in here today, parents, say to your kids, bullying through the phone, bullying through the laptop, bullying through the iPad is just as damaging, just as destructive, just as horrible as if they were looking at you in your face. Parents, monitor, parents of especially middle schoolers when it's so tough. Know what is walking into your children's lives, hearts, and souls, because a fire can start burning that will consume them. 2,000 years later, 3,000 years later, this text is even truer. One of the biggest regrets that Jen and I have is the age in which we let our kids have smartphones. And every one of them now in their mid-20s say that they wish they didn't have it now because of the meanness and the nastiness that came into their lives. 3,000 years later, 2,000 years later, it's even more true. So what do? Let's talk about it this way. The 3 E's of gossip. Part of where gossip comes from is envy. You see somebody doing well, you see somebody, and this is where social media is really brutal. You see somebody doing well, you see somebody doing great, and so we don't want them to keep doing great, and we can't do any better. So we start tearing them down. We start saying stuff about them. We start lighting them up so that we can pull them down. Now, do we really pull them down? Only in our hearts. Only in our hearts, because remember, this is a discipleship issue. And what comes out of here, or even out of here, comes from here. And eventually, the longer it comes out, the more it impacts here. And so it's envy. I was in Belize 10 years ago. We were working on a mission site, and we were working, and one of the pastors there, we began to talk about this other pastor that was there. And this pastor, he is amazing. 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 We were talking about him and bragging on him, and he said, you know, that pastor has a problem. I said, what's that? He said, he's got a PhD. I said, he's got a what? He said, in third world countries, in developing countries, by the way, it's not just developing countries, when preachers start to do real well, we give them their PhD to pull him down or pull her down. Because we got to make sure. It's envy. Gossip is a function of envy. And gossip can be an effective tool to pull people down in our hearts. It is a condition of the heart. The other one, a second one is this, it's ego. See, envy is up, down, ego is in, out. And so let me get 3 volunteers. Just real quick, I will not embarrass you. 3 volunteers. 8:45, come on up. I see a hand back there in the back. I feel like a Baptist preacher now. There's a hand back there in the back. Come on forward. I need 2 more. Give me 2 more. Come on, there we go. 2 right there. You guys come up front. Come right to the front. We're going to do this real quick. I will not embarrass you. So, as a matter of fact, stay right there. Perfect. Where you're at. Girls, they all work at the same company. He got a promotion. They are on the same job, the same place. He got a promotion, and the boss is bragging on him, the company's bragging on it. He got a raise. And so what are these 2 going to do? Well, he ain't that great. And they start talking to one another and talking about one another because they got to make sure that they pull him down, but also more importantly, that because he got something they didn't get, they got to stick together. So ego is not about up, down, it's in, out, because we got to make sure who sticks together. We got to make sure who stays together, and that if we don't get something that they got, we get each other. And it's mean. And it's kind of funny. Thank you guys. You guys can sit down. Thank you guys. It's kind of funny here. You know where this is not funny? At an 8th grade lunch table. Where this is not funny is in high school when kids are still trying to figure out who they are and the pressures. And they can't figure out why these friends that have been their friends since they were little kids are no longer their friends. You know why it's not funny? It's not funny when you're an adult and you've spent your whole life with people, and then all of a sudden, they're not your people anymore. It's ego. It's ego in saying, you got to be with me, you got to stay with me, because at the end of the day, gossip at its core root is about lack of confidence, about lack of understanding and feeling this closeness to God and this closeness to one another, and I've got to make sure. And so now the preacher starts. The third one is ease. I take some stuff someone did and make it worse so that I'm at ease with my stuff. I'd rather focus on your this so that I never have to look at my that. It's ease. Gossips never do self-examination. Gossips allow us to avoid self-examination. We learn to gossip our way to righteousness. Miss Sarah was the most self-righteous person you have ever met in your life. She had everything figured out and had everything right, because she could spend all her time focusing on others and the flaws of others. In a different community, there was a big company in the town next door where two of the church members worked, Jimmy and David. And they called me one day and said, we need to sit down with you. Can you meet us in the office right now? And so I did, and I drove to the church, and I sat with them, and they were teared up. They were crying. These are grown men. These are blue-collar, men. And they grunt when they eat. Men. And they were crying, and they said, this thing just happened to us. We were at work, and we were talking, and Jimmy looked at David and said, what do you think about Bob? And David said this sentence, well, the thing about Bob, there has never been anything good that comes after the thing about anyone. The thing about Bob, and he said we spent like 5-10 minutes just tearing Bob up. And what they didn't know, that Bob was there with them and hearing every word that they said. Every word. And Bob made his presence known, and he looked at them, and they looked at him, and they both started to apologize immediately, and Bob, without saying a word, walked out, went to his desk, picked up his stuff, and went home. The next morning, Jimmy and David were at work, and their boss came to them and said, have you guys seen Bob? We haven't heard from Bob. I guess we're going to have to fill his job if he's not going to. This is an important job. And he never came back, Bob. He never came back. Jimmy and David both tried to call for weeks, both tried to talk to him for weeks, both tried to reach out for months, and he would not answer the call. And so when Jimmy and David came back to my office like 4 months later and sat down, they're teared up and crying again, and they looked at me and they said, here's the worst part, we're Christians. He wasn't. And we're scared to death now that he thinks that we're all this way, and this is what it means to be a Christian, and because of us, he'll never accept Christ. Because of us. Because of our tongues. There are so many people that we come in contact with that we are the hands and feet of Jesus. That we are the testimony of the world. We are the testimony of Christ for people. And if we do not control our tongues, our hearts come spilling out. We are the lens through which people see Jesus. We should try to think. We should try to think. We should ask ourselves, is what I'm saying true? Is it helpful? I hated when my mom would say that to me when I was a kid. Now, Derek, is this helpful? Is what you're saying helpful right now, Derek? The last 9-10 months of my mom's life, she was in the assisted living, and she loved to talk about people that she ate with and the people, what was going on in the hallway and who was dating who and who was seeing who. And I'd look at my mom and go, Mother, is that helpful? And she'd look at me and she'd go, Derek, it's time for you to go home. Is it inspiring? Is it inspiring? You know, the best part of that conversation on Tuesday, that phone call I got on Tuesday, was he inspired someone at work in his faith. His faith was inspiring. Is it necessary? And here's the last one, and this is the one. Is it kind? If we can get this, so much more works. If we can understand, if we can live in the kindness, that kindness is a function of the tongue and the ear. And the ear. And the ear. Because many times we don't feel good. Our blood pressure's through the roof. We find ourselves eating 2 gallons of chocolate ice cream at night and can't figure out why we're so stressed and we're doing this. And I'm preaching for me, not you at that moment. Because we've let these morsels come into us. We've let these morsels come into us and fill us. What would it be like if sometimes we heard that gossip in our ear and we went, that just doesn't ring true? Nothing more, nothing less, but in my experience, that doesn't ring true. Last piece. I hope you got the card that came in. We gave you another card today. If you didn't, we'll give it to you on the way out. From James, from the book of James, you heard the scripture, there is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and destroy. So who then are you to judge your neighbor? At the end of the day, when we participate in gossip, we are judging people. We're judging people. I don't want anybody but God to judge me. But even more than that, what I have found in almost 50 years of life now, I sure don't want to judge you. I don't. And I don't want to be a part of a group that spends its time judging others. I'd rather be kind. I'd rather think the best. Paul was explaining it. Actually, I need to give credit. I didn't give credit to this in the first 2. When I was in seminary, I took polity from Bishop Jones. And he said, when you sign up to be a preacher, you sign up to be gossiped about. You're a public figure and you're going to be gossiped about. You still want to do this? And we all raised our hand and said, yes, we're signing up for that. And Bishop Jones said, this is what you should keep with you. It was Paul writing to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 4. And he said, I hear the stuff and you hear the stuff and you're being gossiped about and you're being talked about. But I want you to know, and again, this is 1 Corinthians 4. I want you to know that this is how I approach it. It's a small thing that you have judged me, Paul says. Paul says to the people in Corinth, I don't lose sleep over what you think about me. And you go, ooh, that sounds kind of harsh. But Paul then goes, but I don't even judge myself. So I don't stay focused on what you think about me, and I don't stay focused on what I think about me. I stay focused because Jesus will come and open the hidden parts of our hearts when we stand before him, and they will show us those hidden inner parts that are filled with these morsels. That there will come a day that we'll stand before Jesus, and these inner, deeper parts of our hearts and our souls will be laid bare before Jesus. Focus on that, because at the end of the day, it is what Jesus thinks about you. It is what Jesus thinks about me. It is what Jesus thinks about all of us is what matters. So the next time you're hearing some delicious morsels, these 3 questions, and we've given you a card to take with you. The question says, did I participate in gossip today? Can we be honest for a second now that I've done all this? We can change that to when I participate in gossip today. Amen? Were my facts straight? Were my facts straight? Did I allow a little bit of tweak here and a little bit of tweak there? Did I allow a little bit of exaggeration? Were my facts straight? And here we go. Did I assume the best today? Did I assume the best of my neighbor? Did I assume the best of my friends? Did I assume the best of everyone of whom I spoke today and everyone I listened today? There's one lawgiver and one judge. And we ain't it. We ain't it. Thank God. Thank God. Amen?